Hello, 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 and welcome to Useful Morning, where we watch the Sunday morning news shows so that you don't have to. I'm Katie Halper.
I'm Aaron Maté. Good Monday morning, everybody. Great to see you. Great to start the week with you and some of the worst people in the world on corporate TV. A reminder that our website is usefulidiospodcast.com. Go there to support the show and get bonus content. Today, we'll be covering extensively the meltdown over the White House meeting that turned into a verbal brawl between Ukrainian President Zelensky and Donald Trump and J.D. Vance. Corporate media not happy that this U.S. proxy is being pushed into peace. Basically, that's I think what it comes down to, is that people in Washington don't like diplomacy, especially if it's with the world's other top nuclear power, which is not a good thing in their eyes. But one thing I want to say is that what we should be covering, I think, just as much, if not more, is Israel announcing that it is reimposing its siege of Gaza. Gaza's already under siege, but it's full siege, where it's not allowing any aid into Gaza, which is a war crime. And especially given that this is being done by another U.S. proxy, because Ukraine is not the only U.S. proxy in the world. Israel actually is an even bigger proxy than Ukraine is historically, gets a lot more money, and has been for a much longer time. This should be the top story everywhere. So Israel is not allowing any aid, any food into Gaza, which is a massive war crime, in furtherance of genocide. And we don't have any clips about that today because it just wasn't covered on the Sunday morning news shows. But if we had a remotely humane media system, that's what would be covered.
Yeah, I mean, even a media system that was just interested in covering the news. I mean, of course, it'd be nice if they were humane, but it's just inexcusable that they don't even feel the need to talk about it. And the thing that you just said, Aaron, there's another word to describe what just happened, which is that Israel broke the ceasefire and did that by committing a massive war crime. I also want to point out the fact that there is a man called Aryeh Neher, and you can tell this to your kind of liberal Zionist friends who deny that this is that this is genocide. He is someone who at first said it wasn't genocide. This guy is the founder of Human Rights Watch. He is a Holocaust survivor, and he also was the head of the ACLU. He said at first it wasn't a genocide, and what made him change his mind is precisely the way that humanitarian aid was blocked.
And the way it's being framed now in the corporate media is that Israel is blocking the aid to get Hamas to agree to extend the ceasefire. The reality is that Israel is blocking the aid to prevent the next phase of the ceasefire, because right now we're in phase 1. There's supposed to be a phase 2 in which Israel completes a full withdrawal from Gaza. Israel doesn't want to do that because it wants to keep occupying Gaza. So therefore, it's pretending as if blocking aid is an attempt to extend the ceasefire, when in fact it's an attempt to avoid its implementation of its obligations under the ceasefire, which include not only withdrawing from Gaza, but also allowing in aid, which it is currently preventing. So that's why it's totally right that what you're saying is that Israel's blocking the ceasefire in the name of trying to extend it.
Yeah, breaking the ceasefire. And again, that is newsworthy. That is newsworthy media. I don't know how you can bring yourselves to look yourselves in the mirror, sleep at night, all that stuff. And in fact, there's one mention of Israel, and you'll see during when we have the show and when we start looking at the clips, and it's interesting, the mention of Israel. It has nothing to do with what we're talking about right now. Also, shout out to, for those of you who watch the Oscars, shout out to No Other Land, I think, excellent documentary about the West Bank and settler and soldier violence and destruction of Palestinian homes. And it won an Oscar. It was incredible. It won Best Documentary. And there is a whole conversation to be had about the limits of the film and the fact that it 100% wouldn't have gotten any coverage had it not been co-directed by an Israeli Jewish journalist. All of that is true. It's still a victory. And in case anyone's has any doubt about that, seeing John Poderet's meltdown over it is a victory in itself.
Well, Katie, you say it's an excellent documentary. Politico says it's a controversial documentary. Look at this. Controversial Middle East documentary wins Academy Award. Why is it controversial? You know why? It's because it treats Palestinians as equal human beings.
Yeah.
And once you accept that premise in Politico land, in the Beltway, in Washington, in Hollywood too, you're controversial all of a
Yeah.
sudden. It's just so strange. And by the way, what's funny about this is that this Academy Award winning film, despite being so good that it won the Oscar in a town that's very hard for to recognize things that like pieces of art that recognize Palestinian humanity, it couldn't get distribution before this. They couldn't even get a distributor in the US. So maybe now that they've won the Academy Award, that might change. But I mean, that's not controversial. It's just straight up racist that it was denied distribution simply because it treated Palestinians as equal human beings.
Right. And another great thing to notice and remember is that this is about stuff that happened before October 7th. So there were, I don't want to give it away, but people were being shot left and right and way up before October 7th. What people who watch this show, I think, realize that. But yeah, and one final thing about this is that it won a big prize at the Berlin Berlinale, the Berlin Film Festival. And a German minister, when they won the award, clapped for the win. She then got pushback and criticism for clapping for this controversial film. It was worthy of criticism that she clapped for this film, right? And there was a Jewish Israeli director and Palestinian director on the stage accepting it. So you know what her excuse was, Aaron?
What's that?
That she was actually only clapping for the Jewish Israeli co-director, not for the Palestinian one. I'm not kidding.
Just unbelievable.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Well, I haven't seen this film like pretty much every other film, but I look forward to seeing this one day. And congratulations, despite the limitations, which I think sound totally fair to me. And
fair to you to point out, you mean?
Yeah. And you still, it's your one-stop shop for Oscars coverage. That's all you need right there. There's your Oscars roundup. Bam.
Yeah, there you go.
We took care of it for you. Yeah.
You're welcome. Yeah. You don't need to watch any other shows. And speaking of which, give us that gratitude that Zelensky didn't give to Trump and JD Vance. Little spoiler alert. Give us that gratitude that he didn't show. Make up for it by giving us a thumbs up.
All right. Well, let's turn to our weekly recap from Meet the Depressed.
Good Sunday morning. The stakes are incredibly high as President Trump prepares to address a joint session of Congress Tuesday night. It comes as newspapers around the world are highlighting what appears to be a realignment of U.S. alliances and a stunning turn towards Russia. On Friday, in a heated confrontation in the Oval Office, President Trump and Vice President Vance berated President Zelensky in an explosive and unprecedented televised showdown. Now, U.S. officials say the path to a peace deal to end the war in Ukraine is deeply uncertain and wholly dependent on the Ukrainian leaders' next steps. Since the clash, Trump administration officials have also discussed whether to pause U.S. military aid to Ukraine, according to two administration officials, though it's unclear whether or when the president would take such a step. The meeting took a sharp turn when the vice president mentioned talks with Russian President Putin.
The path to peace and the path to prosperity is maybe engaging in diplomacy.
Okay, so this is a weird moment where JD Vance is right. Now I want to just say as a kind of a preface disclaimer, none of this means that I think that they are actually for peace for the right reasons, that they're at all consistent with this. But I think we really need to get over looking at the people and just looking at the policy. And I think it's indisputable that diplomacy is a good thing to pursue. If you care about Ukrainians, it's a good thing to pursue. Of course, you know, Trump doesn't always pursue diplomacy, but in this case he is. And another thing is turning towards Russia is an interesting way of saying he's trying to force Zelensky into a negotiation.
Yeah, exactly. That's the framing from Meet the Depressed, is that this is a sharp change in U.S. alliances. We're turning toward Russia. No, we're just turning toward no longer, it looks like, funneling tens of billions of dollars into a proxy war, and we're talking about ending the war. That's what this is. Like, I don't think the U.S. and Russia are about to become best friends.
Right.
Even if Trump really seems to like Putin a lot, I don't think we're going to be seeing like a changing U.S. alignment here as is being discussed. They're just basically saying, hey, we're talking about bringing this proxy war to an end. And that's why when JD Vance brought up like that, hey, you know, we think it's good to be engaging in diplomacy, even though across the board that's not true. Zelensky got triggered, and it was Zelensky contrary to what is now the conventional narrative. It was Zelensky who got confrontational, and he challenged JD Vance over that and tried to basically lecture him, as we'll see a little bit of here.
Yeah.
Broken this ceasefire. He killed our people, and he didn't exchange prisoners. We signed the exchange of prisoners, but he didn't do it. What kind of diplomacy, JD, you are speaking about? What?
All right, so Zelensky is now claiming here that basically, and this was after Zelensky threw out the meeting, and I just wrote about this. People interested on my Substack. It's out now. It's free for everybody. There's a, like people are showing this part of their meeting, which is the confrontational part. But before that, the meeting had gone on for about 40 minutes. And during that time, Zelensky called Putin a terrorist, a killer. He said, we're not going to make any compromises. And Trump and JD Vance didn't push back on him. The only criticism they lodged was when a reporter asked Trump, they said, hey, Zelensky just said he's not going to make any compromises. And Trump said, I think he's going to have to make some compromises, but hopefully not as big as the one that you all think he's going to have to make. So basically, they were being actually, I think, pretty diplomatic with Zelensky, who clearly was trying to push them into not agreeing to diplomacy and to give him security guarantees, which the U.S. has long refused to do, going back to Biden, because they don't want to actually see this war end. They want to see this war continue. And finally, it was when Zelensky right here challenged JD Vance and said, like, what kind of diplomacy you're talking about, that things went awry. But Zelensky is lying in this clip. He says that we signed a prisoner exchange with Putin and he didn't follow through. It's not true. He's talking about an agreement that he reached with Putin in Paris in December 2019. This is actually the only face-to-face meeting between Putin and Zelensky. They signed an agreement in Paris, and there were prisoner exchanges that happened after that. And in fact, there's photographs of it. So I'll show them here. Zelensky attended a
Aaron,
signing.
who sent you those photographs? Did Putin send them to you directly?
No, Putin did not send me these photographs. Getty News Agency took these pictures. Here's Zelensky. This is late December 2019 at a ceremony welcoming home prisoners freed under his agreement with Putin. So it's just simply not true what he's saying, that Putin didn't follow through. And then, of course, there's like a whole other history here, where basically that December 2019 agreement with Putin called on both sides to implement the Minsk Accords, which was the agreement reached to end the war that began after the 2014 coup between the coup government in Ukraine and Russian-backed rebels in eastern Ukraine. And Zelensky took some initial steps to implement that, but then, this is a familiar story, under pressure from far-right nationalists and Washington, he backed off. And he started saying in 2021 that it's impossible for me to implement Minsk, and we're going to retake Donbass by force, which then ultimately got him an invasion from Russia. That's what that led to. So this claim that he's making that we can't negotiate with Putin, it's undermined by the record. And he outright lied in saying that Putin didn't release prisoners under the deal, because as we can see there from those pictures, Zelensky attended a ceremony where those prisoners were released. So there's just a lot of falsification. Of course, no one is going to fact check him on this, because his lies serve the pro-war narrative. So let's hear more from Meet the Depressed.
What do you mean?
I'm talking about the kind of diplomacy that's going to end the destruction of your country.
Yes, but if you
Mr. President, with respect, I think it's disrespectful for you to come into the Oval Office and try to litigate this in front of the American media.
The meeting then descended into a shouting match.
During the war, everybody has problems. Even you, but you have nice ocean and don't feel now, but you will feel.
Do you know why Zelensky's saying, everyone has problems during a war? Because this was after JD Vance brought up the fact that there's videos of Ukrainian military forces literally grabbing people off the street, pushing them into vans to force them off to the front lines and die. And by the way, as we talked about recently on Useful Idiots with a Ukrainian professor, these people who are being kidnapped to go off to die are lower class Ukrainians. Wealthier people are, able to evade conscription. Lower class people are being literally kidnapped to go off to fight. And that's what JD Vance was referencing. And this is where Zelensky grew defensive.
It in the future. God bless.
You don't know that.
God bless. God bless. You will not have a war.
Don't tell us what we're going to feel. We're trying to solve a problem. Don't tell us what we're going to feel.
So this is what Zelensky just said, is that you have an ocean, so you don't feel pain, but you will. Basically saying you guys aren't as close to Russia as we are, but this is going to affect you guys, and it's the implication being that Putin is going to take over the world or try to take over the world. You know, we've heard this.
He's adopting the Adam Schiff talking point that the United States aids Ukraine so that we can fight Russia over there.
Right.
We don't have to fight Russia here. And that's been the dominant bipartisan line for years now, especially in the Russiagate era. And Zelensky's been hearing that, so he's trying it out on Donald Trump. The problem is this is the worst audience possible because, you know, Trump has been targeted precisely because he favors diplomacy with Russia. And here's Trump taking offense, saying, don't threaten us. And the idea that like Russia and the U.S. will have to fight a war unless the U.S. keeps arming Ukraine, it's just so ridiculous. If anything, the proxy war makes war a lot more likely, as Trump actually pointed out to Zelensky. And he's right. Yeah. I'm sorry to say, but he's right.
I'm not telling you.
Because you're in no position to dictate that.
That's
Remember
exactly
this. You're in no position to dictate what we're going to feel. We're going to feel very good.
Feel influence.
We're going to feel very good and very strong.
You will feel influence.
You're right now not in a very good position.
I like the sort of holistic talk here. It's like you don't like, you know, Trump's actually, I think, communicating. I mean, you don't tell me how I feel. Okay, that's
right.
You have to practice nonviolent communication. Okay?
Exactly.
I'm responsible for how I feel. You're responsible for how you feel. Let's both be in our feelings, but don't tell me how I feel. Okay, because that's aggressive.
Well, you know, who was the person who kept talking about that? It's one of the other people we had on, Dan Crenshaw or something, did some psychobabble stuff too. But yeah, I mean, Zelensky, here's a tip. If you can try to sneak in that if you say, I feel that, you kind of can get away with anything. So then you say, I feel like you will feel the pain. Just some tips about how to get around
I feel like you will. That is a much healthier way to communicate it.
Exactly, yeah.
Katie, like you should go on as a personal communications advisor to Zelensky. I think that might have avoided this meltdown.
I think so. And also, guys, again, we bring you pop culture analysis. Every now and then you even get a weather update. Definitely get shark news. And now you get some psychology. Yeah.
From two people who do not have psychology degrees. Yes.
No, although interestingly enough, both of our fathers do deal with that. So
that's true.
You've allowed yourself to be in a very bad position, and he happens to be right about it.
From the very beginning of the war.
You're not in.
I like the way he goes, which he happens to be right about J.D. Vance, as if like, well, it's a one-off, something atypical, but in this case, he is right about it.
A good position. You don't have the cards right now.
You know, another thing I want to say about this is that it is offensive the way that they're speaking to Zelensky, but it is honest in a way that with Biden, we didn't see. But in some ways, I think it's more nefarious to do what Biden did, because as we pointed out before, you know, they said that they could join NATO, knowing full well that was never on the table. I think it's better to be honest about the way you're dealing with this country than dishonest.
I personally welcome the way they spoke to Zelensky. This is my opinion, because he's been spoiled by a proxy war class that's been using his country for its goal of bleeding Russia, and they've given him all this adulation. He's a second coming of Winston Churchill, bipartisan standing ovation. They've puffed him up. They've played to his ego, this former actor, and they've made him to be completely. He's become really entitled. He thinks he can go to the U.S. and just demand more weaponry, security guarantees, because he's been puffed up. And Trump is giving him, I think, some real talk, which I think is refreshing. The one part where I do think they were disrespectful was when J.D. Vance said to Zelensky, you should be thanking us.
Yeah, it's gross.
Have you thanked us today? When Zelensky has been very thankful.
Yes.
And also, why should Ukraine be thanking the U.S. for using Ukraine to bleed Russia? Like, thanking the U.S. for military support that has led to Ukraine's destruction, when, of course, the U.S. doesn't care about Ukraine's well-being. As the Biden administration laid out, as multiple neocons have laid out, the goal was to use Ukraine to bleed Russia, you know, to like what's that line from Mike Johnson? Like, I'd rather be sending them our bullets than our young boys.
Yeah.
Some creepy, weird comment, but it's true. It's like sacrificing young Ukrainians with our bullets. And there's no reason for Zelensky to be thankful about that at all, because he's been used. He's a tool.
Right.
Unfortunately, he doesn't realize that. He thinks he's actually in charge here, to the point where he can get into a confrontation with the president of his chief sponsor, which has been a disaster for him.
And again, I think this point is so good, Aaron, that you often cite, excuse me, the late Stephen F. Cohen, who pointed out that because look, he ran on peace, right? He ran on the Minsk Accords, then he didn't deliver on that. And you have a very scary neo-Nazi movement, in some ways incorporated into the Azov battalion. I mean, my point is it's bigger than the Azov, but there are people in the Azov battalion from that. And they are scary, and they threatened him, which you even see on video, right? They threatened him. And in order for Zelensky to be able to stand up to those people, he would have needed a lot of support from the United States, but he didn't get that.
Stephen F. Cohen told me, there's a very famous clip of this. We did an interview in October 2019, just as Adam Schiff was leading this push to impeach Trump for pausing weapons to Ukraine while pressuring Ukraine to investigate Joe Biden and other matters, including the origins of Russiagate. And Stephen F. Cohen said that rather than trying to impeach Trump for pausing weapons, we should be encouraging Trump to help Ukraine, help Zelensky stand up to the far-right fascist thugs who are threatening his life, and we should be helping him make peace. And of course, Stephen F. Cohen was ignored, and that helped give us the war we're in right now.
Right.
It's a real
ignored and maligned.
Yes, and which speaks to, I think Stephen F. Cohen would agree, it's not Trump who's selling out Ukraine now. It was Washington. It was the bipartisan consensus of using Ukraine to bleed Russia. They sold out Zelensky because they didn't back up the peace mandate that he was elected on, that so many Ukrainians across the spectrum were excited about, because Zelensky, an outsider, was promising to make peace. And initially, I have to say, he took some steps that were positive toward that goal. But without the U.S., his chief sponsor, backing him up, he couldn't stand up to the far right in Ukraine. And that helped give us the mess we're in right now.
Right. And also, we should point out all the terrible things that Trump did do, right? So he reversed Obama's refusal to send Javelin weapons. He, as much as people call him Putin's boyfriend, right? He sanctioned Russia for their involvement in the annexation of Crimea, increased its security assistance to the Ukrainian military, approved a plan to provide lethal munitions to Ukraine. Yeah.
Trump certainly could take responsibility for his role in fueling all of this, rather than just saying that it's Ukraine that should be thankful to him. When in fact, he did play a role in bringing us to where we are. He also tore up a really important arms control treaty that massively escalated tensions with Russia, and that Russia tried to address before it invaded. So Trump certainly shares responsibility for this mess. But to his credit, he's now trying to end it. It looks like, or he's talking about ending it, which is better than Joe Biden, who wouldn't even speak to Russia and whose answer was only to go to Congress every once in a while and ask for, billions of dollars, tens of billions of dollars to keep funding this horrible war. Let's go back to Meet the Depressed.
Thus, you start having cards. Right now, you don't. You're playing cards. You're playing cards. You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III.
I think, by the way, I'm not sure, but I think when he says your card, you don't have the cards, and he goes, "I'm not playing cards. I'm very serious." I think Zelensky may not know what what that idiom is. I think he actually thought maybe Trump was accusing him of being unserious and playing cards, but I'm not sure. But that's what I thought. And again,
having poker night in the presidential palace rather than you being a wartime president. Who knows? Yeah.
You're gambling with World War III. And what you're doing is very disrespectful to the country, this country. That's back to you. Far more than a lot of people said they should have.
Have you said thank you once this entire meeting? No, in this entire meeting, have you said thank you?
That's just gross.
His ambassador to the U.S. at one.
Yeah, that was lame from JD. Just that's him saying kiss the ring, young man.
Exactly,
bow down and thank your wonderful leader here, Trump, for all he's done for you. No, that's the one part where I do think he was disrespected. On top of the fact that a reporter from a Trump-friendly news network was like, "How come you don't ever wear a suit?" Which was just that was a bully move as well. Okay, we have so many clips to get to, so let's try to get to this.
Point hid her face in her hands. A White House.
That's the Ukrainian ambassador who hid her face in her hands because Zelensky. I mean, he. Before they got into this fight, Trump said, he said, "Yeah, we're going to." A reporter asked, "Are you going to continue to arm Ukraine?" And Trump said, "Yes, we are." So, Zelensky was getting what I mean, not everything he wanted, but at least Trump was saying we're going to continue arming Ukraine. But he had to then confront JD Vance when JD Vance talked about diplomacy, and now even that might be in jeopardy. There's apparently a review going on, because after this happened, they kicked Zelensky out of the White House and they canceled this minerals deal in which Ukraine was going to sign over,
right,
its mineral rights to the U.S., which was going to make Trump really happy because he could brag about how he's ripping off Ukraine by taking its valuable minerals. But now that's in jeopardy too, it looks like. So it was not a good move by Zelensky.
Official tells NBC News that following the confrontation, President Zelensky was asked to leave the White House. A planned joint news conference abruptly canceled. A minerals deal that was completed left unsigned. President Trump posting on social media he disrespected the United States of America in its cherished Oval Office. He can come back when he is ready for peace. The confrontation comes just days after the U.S. sided with Russia over Europe at the United Nations, opposing a resolution condemning Russian aggression on the third anniversary of its invasion of Ukraine. The Oval Office showdown was cheered in Russia. Putin ally Dmitry Medvedev writing, quote, "The insolent pig finally got a proper slapdown in the Oval Office." As U.S. military support for Ukraine hangs in the balance, President Zelensky weighed in on Fox News.
So I'm not hearing from you, Mr. President, a thought that you owe the president an apology.
No, I respect the president and I respect American people. And if, I don't know, if I think that we have to be very open and very honest. And I'm not sure that we did something bad. This is so sensitive. Just a ceasefire without security guarantees. This is so sensitive for our people. I'm speaking like a president of a people who are in this struggle 3 years, and they just want to hear that America on our side and that America will stay with us, not with Russia, with us.
And joining me now is the Speaker of the House.
Well, Zelensky refusing to apologize, which, you have to give him credit. He's not backing down in the face of bullying from his chief sponsor, from Trump. A lot of people I think would, but he's in trouble now. He's in trouble. And I think this derives from him being coddled and puffed up by NATO proxy warriors who gave him a really inflated ego and painted him to be this like heroic figure simply because he was letting the U.S. and its allies use his country for their goal of bleeding Russia. And now he's facing the consequences of that. And let's first hear from Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who...
And one second, Eric, I just want to say that what's interesting about what you just said is that imagine if, and here's a little preview, but imagine if the United States reacted to Netanyahu the way they do to Zelensky.
Well, yeah, that'd be amazing, right? If the U.S. can be consistent on that and like using the leverage it has over its proxies. But of course, we'll never see that when it comes to Israel. In fact, we'll just see people kissing the ring. We'll be kissing Netanyahu's feet. But here's Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, defending Trump's and Vance's conduct at the White House.
One thing I just want to bring up. What do you think, Aaron, of the refusal to condemn Russia for invading? Because I know that you've consistently said that the invasion was not unprovoked, but it also wasn't justified.
Well, their argument is they're trying to end the war. So what's the point now in like piling on with another condemnation? Right. And so look, I think trying to end this war is a good thing. And who cares about a resolution offering yet one more condemnation of the Russian invasion? Like, if it can help them end the war, I think that's a great thing. And what moral authority does the U.S. have to be condemning anyone for aggression anyway, given its own record, and and its own? So it's like, I don't see why that's an issue. But
and guys, please, we watched this stuff. It's very painful. We have almost 3,000 people watching, and we have 944 people who've liked. Give it a like. You're not all hate watchers. I'm sure there's some, but we really should be at over half. But I'm willing to keep the show going because I'm a good person once we get to 1,000. So let's get those numbers up. We're at 951. Where are we at now? 1K. Thank you very much. All right, let's go back to the show.
Feasible only if the United States is willing to also provide security guarantees to Ukraine. That was the point that President Zelensky was also making in the Oval Office.
Well, the security guarantees, which I actually like to call deterrence, is all contingent upon there being a peace. Everybody's saying security guarantees to secure the peace. You first have to have a peace. We don't even know if the peace is possible. And this was understood by the Ukrainians. It was explained to them repeatedly. And that is, here's our strategy. We're trying to get Putin to a negotiating table. Let's not everyone knows the history here, the back and forth. We understand that. We all understand that. But the question now is, can we get them to a table to negotiate? That's our goal. Don't do anything to disrupt that. And that's what Zelensky did, unfortunately, is he found every opportunity to try to Ukraine-splain on every issue. Then he confronts the vice president. When the vice president says,
Ukraine-splain, that's it. I haven't heard that one before.
Yeah, it's a good one.
I don't know if Marco Rubio came up with that, but I mean, look, Zelensky had gotten not everything he wanted, but again, he had gotten Trump's commitment to keep arming Ukraine, which is the only way that Zelensky can keep this war going. But that wasn't enough for him. He started talking about how you can negotiate with Putin, and he also kept talking about security guarantees, which again, the Trump administration said is a non-starter because they don't want to fight directly with Russia, especially while Ukraine is at war with Russia. And unfortunately, this is where Zelensky has to, I mean, if he had a remote sense of accountability, he'd take responsibility for his own decisions. Back in the spring of 2022, the Istanbul talks that are still pretty much banned from discussion in U.S. corporate media. Russia and Ukraine reached the outline of a peace deal. Zelensky went to the U.S. and UK and said, will you give me a security guarantee to back this up? Boris Johnson came over and said, no, we're not going to sign anything with you. We're not going to give you a security guarantee, and you should keep fighting Putin, and we think that you can win. Now, Zelensky could have said, all right, I'm going to get a security guarantee from Russia. Forget you guys. I'm going to end this war because I don't want this war to continue. Instead, he obeyed Boris Johnson. He obeyed Joe Biden, and he kept fighting. That's why he's so desperate now to get a security guarantee from Trump, is because he walked away from a deal that could have prevented hundreds of thousands of deaths, and he needs something to show for it now. But Trump's not going to give it to him. And because Zelensky can't accept that, he helped turn this thing into an absolute meltdown for himself and put himself in a really bad position.
The goal here is diplomacy. He immediately jumps in and challenges the vice president. Well, what kind of diplomacy? So we all understand, okay, that Putin is not going to be an easy negotiator in this regard. We all get that, but we have to start the process to see if something is even possible. And I honestly am puzzled. I just don't understand. The Biden administration berated Benjamin Netanyahu and the Israelis, put all kinds of conditions in.
Okay, was there a single time? The famous thing they did was what? Pause a shipment of bombs. They paused one shipment of 2,000-pound bombs. Yeah, which Israel already had in abundance anyway. So after sending them a bunch of 2,000-pound bombs to destroy schools and homes and mosques and hospitals with, then they paused one shipment. Now, he never berated Netanyahu. I mean, that would have been amazing. The closest he came was acknowledging in an interview, and again, I think this is more like senility, and when he said the quiet part out loud, I don't even think he meant to, but where he acknowledged that it was in Netanyahu's personal best interest to keep the war going, so he wouldn't face any legal consequences.
Yeah, one time also at a private fundraiser, Biden said that Netanyahu had carried out the indiscriminate bombing of Gaza, which is a war crime. But he wasn't being critical. He was just saying it. He's like, yeah, they've been indiscriminate in their bombing. Yeah, I know that. But he wasn't berating Netanyahu for that. He was just stating it as fact.
Right.
But for the Republicans, they're so deferential to Israel that even like Biden pausing one shipment is amounts to berating Israel. And that's their argument now. It's like, hey, like Biden paused one shipment of bombs to Israel, so why are you mad at us now for trying to make peace? It just speaks to how absolutely off the charts extreme they are when it comes to support for Israel. Yeah. It's insane.
Pressure on them to try to get a ceasefire. In this particular case, we've been nice by comparison. And all we're trying to do here is figure out whether a peace is possible. All these other things that people keep bringing up.
Okay, imagine for 1 second, and it requires so much of a suspension of reality. Someone saying to Netanyahu, "Have you thanked us?"
Yeah, no, never. They never happened. Never happened.
Never in a million years.
They'd have to resign if ever they said that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, but anyway, that's Marco Rubio. That's his defense. Like, hey, like we're not putting any pressure on Israel. So what are you mad about, basically?
Right.
Okay, we're being nice to Ukraine by comparison to Biden's one pause on a weapon shipment to Israel.
Yeah, and Israel is the leading recipient of U.S. foreign aid. I mean, we should note that.
Let's jump ahead to Mike Waltz. He is the national security advisor to Donald Trump. He also has been an extreme supporter of Israel and supports the policy of putting no pressure on Israel whatsoever. Let's turn to that clip of Mike Waltz, the national security advisor. He spoke to CNN about the meltdown in the Oval Office, in the White House.
For us, kind of talking about the details and demands of security guarantees before, as President Trump said, look, I don't know that we can get both sides to the table at this point. And, you can't kind of trash the other side going, litigating through the history of this conflict if we're going to bring both sides to the table. And further, coming to the Oval Office.
See, they're criticizing Zelensky here for trying to litigate the history of the okay, I mean, it's true. And also, as I pointed out earlier, Zelensky made false claims to justify why he believes you can't have diplomacy with Russia. But here's the thing. Whenever these people talk about Palestine, they're always saying, Palestinians, this, that, Hamas, blah, blah, blah. They're constantly litigating and they're pushing the false Israeli narrative, which justifies Israeli mass murder. So this idea that now all of a sudden they're against berating one side and that undermines efforts towards peace. I mean, it's true when it comes to Ukraine, but that's also true when it comes to Israel and Palestine too. And in that case, they're totally on the side of Israel. So a lot of hypocrisy. Again, if only we could have anybody in politics who is consistent across the board, whether that's Mike Waltz and the Trump administration or Bernie Sanders who can recognize the injustice of what the U.S. is supporting in Palestine. But yet now that the Trump administration is talking about peace with Russia, he's upset. He says he's sad. Can we get one person who's consistently against militarism and favors diplomacy, especially when it happens to be with U.S. proxies like Ukraine and Israel?
Office, with the body language, the shaking of head, the kind of the arms crossed, we found it incredibly disrespectful. We were ready to sign that deal. I want to address directly that this was some
body language. They didn't like Zelensky's body language. They didn't like his vibe.
He did have his arms crossed, I believe, and that's very. It's not open.
I've been told actually before by people I socialize with that when I cross my arms, they find it off-putting. But it's man, I personally find that a little sensitive. I can't cross my arms. You know what I mean? I don't have autonomy over my own placement of my limbs. I just find that a little bit I find that disrespectful personally. Well, I say Zelensky, cross away, Zelensky. Don't let them body language shame you.
You're a cross apologist. You're a cross enabler.
100%.
But 100%. Aaron, maybe you're being sensitive when you get that feedback from people.
Well, maybe. Who knows?
Yeah.
Who knows? But I support the crossing of the arms, whatever hand gesture Zelensky feels like he wants to make. All right.
Type of ambush is absolutely false. We had negotiated the minerals deal in the weeks prior. It was difficult, but it was done and finalized and ready to be signed in the East Room.
So since you've been...
Yes, they had negotiated the minerals deal, which would basically obligate Ukraine to hand over a large percentage of its mineral wealth to the U.S. and get nothing in return. And Zelensky was understandably frustrated with that. But look, the problem is you put yourself in this position, man. You become entirely dependent on the U.S. And that's not just him. That's the post-coup Ukrainian government. After the coup of 2014, the U.S. has played a massive role in Ukraine. The CIA basically took over parts of Ukraine's intelligence services, built bases. U.S. officials helped pick who would work in Ukrainian ministries. Joe Biden infamously bragged about getting a prosecutor fired by withholding loan guarantees. Victoria Nuland bragged about how there's U.S. advisors in almost every department of the Ukrainian government. So this is what happens when you turn yourself into a U.S. client state, is they use you and then discard you when you're no longer necessary. And Zelensky, unfortunately, is finding that out right now. Okay, more Mike Waltz.
This is a good one.
Ask about your view of Volodymyr Zelensky, because right after the Ukraine war happened, after Russia invaded Ukraine, to be more specific, you were on CNN and you called Zelensky a 21st century Churchill because of how he was leading the fight against Russian tyranny. And yesterday you called him, or at least you compared him to an ex-girlfriend who wants to argue everything that you said 9 years ago rather than move.
Maybe that's what Churchill was like also, though. Like an ex-girlfriend. Just putting it out there. Maybe it's not a contradiction.
Well, and this speaks to how funny this moment is, because there's no way, if Trump hadn't adopted this policy, there's no way Mike Waltz will be arguing now for peace. He'd still be hailing Zelensky as the second coming of Winston Churchill, because again, why? Mike Waltz was on board, just like everybody else in uniparty Washington, with the proxy war. Now he's under Trump, and Trump is the king of MAGA, so he has to kiss the ring and now repeat Trump's talking points. But there's no way he'd be having this position if not for Trump right now. And it's funny seeing all these neocons in this position of having to now pretend to be peace advocates, like simply because Trump has shifted the mood in Washington.
Right. And of course, the one of the other points of comparing him to Winston Churchill is not just to show him as this great statesman, but the implication is that Putin is the Hitler, which again, we pointed out many times is so irresponsible and ahistorical. And if that were true, we'd be there with boots on the ground.
Is that really how you see it now? And do you see at all the perspective that he was trying to put out there, which is that he does not trust Vladimir Putin and he feels that he needs some kind of security guarantee?
Well, Donna, I would also point out, if we want to do a history lesson on Churchill, that he stood and fought for his people. President Zelensky stood and fought for Ukraine. But Churchill was also voted out of office in 1945. He was a man for a moment, but he did not then transition England into the next phase. And it's unclear whether President Zelensky, particularly after what we saw Friday, is ready to transition to Ukraine to an end to this war and to negotiate and have to compromise. Yeah. And what President Trump said right there that day in the Oval Office is both sides are going to compromise here. He's made that clear to both Vladimir Putin and Zelensky, but it did not appear to us that Zelensky was ready to go to peace. Yeah. So when he makes that clear to us, publicly and privately, that's the president is trying to end this war. He campaigned on it. He was elected on it. And that's going to take tough diplomacy. Who would criticize us? But you have members of Democrats that are criticizing us for dealing with the Russians, the same Democrats that had no problem dealing with the murderous Iranian regime in an Iran deal that was horrific and used the Russians as intermediaries.
This is how you defend diplomacy in Washington. Well, they spoke to the Iranians, okay? Spoke to so why can't we speak to the Russians?
Right.
They spoke to the Iranians, so why can't we speak to the Russians? It's like a
so
kid.
ridiculous.
They did it. So it's like, hey, how about we just say diplomacy is a good thing? Like, why berate Democrats for dealing with Iran and reaching the Iran deal? Like, let's say, hey, diplomacy is good. Let's all be on board with diplomacy, whether it's with Russia or Iran. It's not like a competition to see who's like the worst baddie, like the least worst baddie country to deal with to end awful conflicts.
Right. But, and this again goes back to the rank hypocrisy, right? Because Trump is the one who ripped up the deal with the Iranians. So it's a little awkward because they're both praising diplomacy, which is a good thing. Diplomacy is a good thing. Pursuing peace is a good thing through negotiation. But it's obviously not a real commitment because they were the ones who Trump was the one who ripped up the Iran deal. And now Waltz, in his stupidity, is instead of saying, like, the way, if he wanted to call out Democrats for being hypocrites, what he should say is, well, they understand the power of diplomacy, which is why they had the Iran deal. But he can't say that because Trump is the one who got rid of it. Very awkward.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's a good one for Mike Waltz. Let's turn now to House Speaker Mike Johnson suggesting possibly that Zelensky needs to go.
Senator Lindsey Graham on Friday floated the idea that President Zelensky may need to resign in order for there to be a peace agreement. Do you agree with that statement?
Well, something has to change. Either he needs to come to his senses and come back to the table in gratitude, or someone else needs to lead the country to do that. I mean, it's up to the Ukrainians to figure that out. But I can tell you that we are re-exerting peace through strength. President Trump has brought back strength to the White House. We knew that this moment would come. We worked hard for it to come. And now it's here. But we need these parties to go along with this. And we need President Zelensky to do what is necessary. This war has drug on far too long. He's lost hundreds of thousands of people, including women and children. We've got to bring it in.
It's interesting. He never seemed to notice that before. I mean, we've noticed that a lot of people who are urging, diplomacy on this issue, somehow now he notices that innocent Ukrainians are being killed, and he cares about that.
Yeah, in fact, it was Mike Johnson who helped push through the last $60 billion package for Biden to continue the proxy war just last spring. That was Mike Johnson after he got the blessing from Donald Trump, who now turns around and says, I want peace. And the reason I think why Trump did that is because he didn't want to be, called weak against Putin on the campaign. So he got behind the $60 billion. So there's a lot of hypocrisy here. And of course, does Mike Johnson ever talk about the women and children killed in Gaza? No.
Oh, obviously not, yeah.
He cheers that on.
Well, Aaron, as just really quickly, as Alan Dershowitz taught me when I debated him on Piers Morgan, it's actually ageist. How old are the children? He asked, which, as people pointed out, is probably a phrase that he says a lot. But it's ageist and sexist to suggest that there's anything wrong with killing women and children.
Ugh.
So gross.
Okay. Let's turn to Tulsi Gabbard. She's the director of national intelligence. She appeared on Fox News.
Also, though, think that they're in more alignment, and they should be, with the U.S. when it comes to those freedoms and things you talk about. Certainly, those are not things that you would say that Russia or Putin celebrates or bestows on his own people.
That's correct. I would not make that claim, and it's clear that that's not the case, nor does President Trump. But that's not really what we're talking about here. We're talking about many of these European countries and Zelensky himself, who claim to be standing and fighting for the cause of freedom and democracy, when we actually look at what's happening in reality in these countries, as well as with Zelensky's government in Ukraine, is the exact opposite. You have the canceling of elections in Ukraine. You have political parties being silenced or even criminalized or thrown in prison. You have the freedom of religion, churches being shut down. You have political opposition being silenced. You have total government control of the media. We could go down a whole laundry list of issues that are against the values of democracy and freedom. So it really begs the question, as Vice President Vance said again in Munich, it's clear that they're standing against Putin. Obviously, that's clear. But what are they actually really fighting for? And are they aligned with the values that they claim to hold in agreement with us? The values that President Trump and Vice President Vance are standing for, and those are the values of freedom, of peace, and true security.
All right, so the way that you describe Ukraine and the way that most Americans and most of the world understands Russia, are you saying it's essentially choosing between the lesser of two evils?
What I'm focused on is what President Trump is focused on, which is peace, seeing the world through a very clear picture and making sure that the president is having honest and good faith negotiations with both of these countries to bring about an end to this war. That is
what is blowing minds in Washington, that this administration is talking about peace. And look what she said about Zelensky canceling elections, putting opponents in prison. It's true. And even the excuse that Zelensky has tried to invoke, which is that, we're in war, I have to take certain measures. A year before Russia invaded, he shut down 3 opposition television networks. And what one of his aides later admitted was a welcome gift to the Biden administration, which wanted him to be confrontational, because these opposition TV networks were tied to parties that were talking about making peace with Russia. So Zelensky's authoritarianism predates the Russian invasion. You can't even use that as an excuse. And what she's saying also gives a lie to this claim that, Ukraine's a democracy and that's why we're defending it. It's nothing to do with that. It has to do with the fact that Ukraine's being used to bleed Russia. And I got to say, there's so much to criticize Tulsi Gabbard for. Her reversal on Palestine, she said some somewhat decent things back when she ran for president. Now, since joining the MAGA camp, she's throwing Palestinians under the bus. She's demonized Palestinian supporters. But on this issue, she's speaking a lot of sense. And it's refreshing to hear this from the nation's top intelligence official, who, unlike her predecessors, is not lying to the U.S. public about what the reality of Ukraine is. And I think that's that's a real shift, and it's significant. No matter what their motives are, what she's saying is true. It just is. Okay, well,
she was also banned in FISA. Yeah.
Let's turn to the Democrats, how they're responding to all this. This is not an easy time for them, seeing Zelensky being berated. Let's turn to Senator Mark Kelly.
To Ukraine a number of times. Our last guest, Mike Turner, has been to Ukraine a number of times as well. Neither the president nor the vice president have it all. J.D. Vance, the vice president, said to Zelensky, those are propaganda tours. Is that what you did? Did you go on propaganda tours?
What
no,
a hard.
I mean, I went into.
I want to give Margaret Brennan a shout out. What a great, brave, adversarial question to Mark Kelly. Thank you for that. Really probing, not at all set up leading question. She might as well have handed him she might as well have said, can you say these weren't propaganda tours, please? Thanks.
No, I mean, I went into Patriot batteries and, talked to the troops that every night are defending themselves from incoming ballistic missiles and cruise missiles, trying to keep their population alive. I met with soldiers, some of which are, amputees at this point, and soldiers that just came from the front lines to talk to me in person about what the situation on the ground is. I met with pilots there who were about to get their F-16s, and we talked specifically about, how can you use this airplane in combat?
Yeah.
I think J.D. Vance, vice president, with all due respect, it sounds like he's watching videos on the internet.
Mm-hmm.
And to say to Zelensky, you're not being thankful enough? I mean, Zelensky thanks the American people all the time.
Yeah.
And I got to say, Margaret, if we can end this, and I want this to end as much as anybody, but it has to end in a way that the Russians are going to respect. And what was in the Oval Office yesterday was a demonstration of weakness. And I can tell you, Putin does not respect weakness.
So, okay. So what's your answer then? How do you want it to end? Then you want to keep creating more Ukrainian amputees.
Right.
By funneling weaponry into war that they can't win. That's the Mark Kelly prescription. And his line there that it seems like J.D. Vance is watching videos on the internet. Correct. He is. And what do those videos show? Exactly what J.D. Vance told Zelensky, that things are so dire that you're basically kidnapping people to send them off to die on the front lines. And what J.D. Vance didn't mention is that these people who are being kidnapped and forced to fight come from the lower class. It's not wealthy Ukrainians that are being forced to go off and give their lives for a proxy war. And here's a compilation of some of the footage of Ukrainians being forcibly grabbed off the street to go off to fight.
Катя, помоги! Ну, это просто пипец! Я, ти що кончений? Я не затриманий!
That is so disturbing. And, I had Lev Galinkin on my show last week. We've had him on this show. He's great. He's a Ukrainian-American journalist who dares to show a perspective you never see on corporate media. But he was saying, look, the reason that these people are resisting so hard is because they don't want to die. Because they will die. Yeah. I mean, because it's such an imbalanced fight.
Yes. And so Mark Kelly's correct. J.D. Vance has seen the videos, and he doesn't need to go to Ukraine. Like, Zelensky tried to basically undermine Vance by saying, have you been to Ukraine? Right. So the implication is like his concerns aren't valid because he hasn't been on a propaganda tour to Ukraine. And J.D. Vance said, no, but I've seen the videos of people being kidnapped. And we just saw an example of that. And Mark Kelly, his position is presumably that this should continue. People should continue being forced off to fight an unwinnable war. And of course, it should be lower class Ukrainian men doing the dying.
Right. And of course, actually Mark Kelly should be watching those videos. It's 100%. Not an own on Vance. It's actually an own on a cell phone.
100%. All right. Senator Chris Murphy, who's been all over this Ukraine proxy war from the start. He took part in the delegation of U.S. officials that went to Maidan Square in December 2013 and encouraged what became a coup that set off this whole mess. And after the coup happened, after Ukraine's president was overthrown, Chris Murphy actually went on C-SPAN and took credit, said that we played a major role in this change of regime. Those were his words. So he took credit for regime change, which then means he should take credit for all the carnage that has ensued as a result ever since in the more than 10 years since. Well, here's Chris Murphy giving his thoughts on the White House meltdown.
There's hope of salvaging this relationship with Ukraine?
So it is absolutely shameful what is happening right now. The White House has become an arm of the Kremlin. Every single day you hear from the National Security Advisor.
Okay. Every single day from early 2017 till the end of Trump's first administration, we heard Democrats say that the White House has become an arm of the Kremlin. So did they maybe consider that this has not worked out for them? Remember the whole Mueller investigation when they claimed that Trump was a Russian conspirator? Yeah. It didn't work out very well, but yet they really can't let this one go. And I think there's so much to criticize the Trump administration for. The Trump administration is an arm of the oligarchy. Right. That's what they're an arm of, not the Kremlin. They're an arm of the oligarchy. And Democrats have been pointing this out accurately. And we're going to talk in a bit about the proposed or the potential likely cuts to Medicaid. They're an arm of the oligarchy. But instead of focusing on that, they can't help but fall into this jingoistic Cold War mentality that because Trump says nice things about Putin and wants diplomacy with Russia, that means that he's working for the Kremlin. And it didn't work out so well for them last time. I don't understand why they're doubling down on it now, except for the fact they're just deranged Cold War hawks. And I think that's a real problem the Democrats need to confront.
From the President of the United States, from his entire national security team, Kremlin talking points. For the last week.
Oh, I call that he's saying that they're the Kremlin arm, the arm of the Kremlin. Yeah.
The White House has been pretending as if Ukraine started this war. That's essentially saying that Poland invaded Germany at the beginning of World War II. There are still facts in this world.
No, what started the war, Chris Murphy, was when you took part in backing a coup of Ukraine's democratically elected government. And the reason why the U.S. supported that coup is because that the president was overthrown, Yanukovych, was saying that Ukraine will remain neutral, will not join NATO. That was in line with the majority of Ukrainian public opinion and with Ukraine's own declaration of state sovereignty. But because George W. Bush and Dick Cheney, in their wisdom, had said that Ukraine will one day join NATO, it became, for some reason, a top priority of Obama's State Department, led by Victoria Nuland, joined by people like Chris Murphy and John McCain, to have regime change. And so you helped start this whole thing. If you want to believe that Russia invading on February 24th, 2022 started this war, that's when history begins. Okay. If you understand linear time, go back to when there was a coup and a war broke out as a result. And the U.S. has sabotaged efforts to end that war ever since. And now we're in what we're in today.
And, a lot of people, there's a lot of debate over whether or not it's a coup. And what was a coup. I'm not weighing in on this right now. My point is that even if you don't see it as a coup, there are points at which you can definitely point to the United States sabotaging peace, right? So, I mean, Boris Johnson going there on behalf of the West, knowing that this was going to provoke Putin, what they were doing with NATO, knowing that was a red line based on that WikiLeaks document. Well, based on the document that was released by WikiLeaks by Burns, where he said, "Niet means niet."
Oh, there's so much. Listen, I'm going to show you this clip of Chris Murphy. This is Chris Murphy in February 2014. Okay, 2014, right after the coup in Ukraine, and watch Chris Murphy take credit for what he calls the change of regime.
I will admit to you that I have not been involved in what's happening in Venezuela over the last week because I've been focused as the chairman of the Europe subcommittee on Ukraine. But
he's like, I wasn't able to focus on that attempted regime change because I was working on another regime change. So apologies. I'm bad at multitasking.
With respect to Ukraine, we have not sat on the sidelines. We have been very much involved. Members of the Senate who have been there, members of the State Department who have been on the square. The administration, the Obama administration, passed sanctions. The Senate was prepared to pass its own set of sanctions. And as I said, I really think that the clear position of the United States has in part been what has helped lead to this change in regime. So
change in regime. He's taking credit for regime change. Let's hear that one more time.
Clear position of the United States has in part been what has helped lead to this change in regime. So
there you go, Chris Murphy. Own your own words. If you're taking credit for regime change, then take credit for the mess that's ensued ever since. Don't pretend as if this started when Russia invaded 10 years after you took credit for the change of regime inside Ukraine. It's one or the other. If you're going to take credit, then own the results. And because they won't do that, then they want to pretend as if it's all because Donald Trump is working for Moscow. It's so silly and so dangerous too. So that's Chris Murphy. Because we're running out of time, let's skip to another issue. We have covered, I think, Ukraine.
Yeah, we've done the foreign policy. Should we bring it to domestic?
Let's turn this to domestic issues. Yes.
All right. So here is a clip of Mike Johnson being asked about whether or not entitlements are under threat with the Republican agenda.
Well, I do want to talk about the big budget bill that passed through the House. Your plan calls for almost $900 billion over the next 10 years in cuts from the Energy and Commerce Committee. As you know, it's going to be nearly impossible to reach that level of cuts without touching entitlements. I know you have been asked this before, Mr. Speaker, but I need to get you on the record here again. Are cuts to Medicaid, Medicare, and Social Security off the table?
Yes, and don't take my word for it, Kristen. Go do a word search of the budget resolution that we passed on Tuesday. There is not one mention of Medicare, Medicaid, or Social Security. It's not in the bill because we haven't set the policy. What we're trying to do is get America back on sound fiscal ground. We have a $36 trillion federal debt and ballooning deficits. The Republican Party is the party of fiscal responsibility. The American people...
I mean, A, that's not true. They cut taxes for the wealthy in Trump's first term, which they now want to make permanent. And that massively expanded the deficit. So I don't know what he's talking about. All while, of course, boosting military spending. And yes, when he says Medicaid cuts aren't literally written in the bill, that's true. But as we've talked about a lot, the bill calls for a cut of $880 billion from the House committee that oversees Medicaid. And the only way they could possibly meet that goal is by massively cutting Medicaid. So it's just a semantic trick that he's trying to pull here. It's pretty transparent. And I don't see, but they're in a pickle though, because people like Medicaid. It's a popular program and many Trump supporters are on Medicaid. So how are they going to get around this cut they have enshrined in their bill to the committee, like in the committee overseeing Medicaid, while still trying to pretend with people that they're not going to cut Medicaid? Well, actually, we're going to actually hear how Mike Johnson is going to try to justify it.
Want us to review the expenditures of the country and get our fiscal house in order, and that's what we must do. At the same time, we've got to extend the Trump-era tax cuts so we can make sure that every American does not receive the largest tax increase in U.S. history at the end of this year. We have very serious work. We can do both of those things simultaneously and not affect benefits for anyone who relies upon those and is eligible to receive them. President Trump's been crystal clear about this, and we have as well. But in those programs, you have lots of inefficiencies. In Medicaid, for example, there's an estimated $50 billion a year that is lost in fraud alone. We've got to clean that up.
What's the source of that, by the way? Where do they get this from? Is that Elon Musk? Like, is that Elon Musk telling them that? Like, I found $50 billion worth of, okay, let's cut Medicaid. What's the source of that? That's a lot of money.
And in fact, there's a clip, we don't have time to show it, but in this very same interview, she pushes back by explaining like how little evidence there is of fraud. It's like a very small percentage. And he goes, I don't believe it. I don't believe it. But we're supposed to believe his talking points. And you know what, Aaron? If you do what he just said, which is you do a word search, Apple F, for Social Security, let's see what you have. So it does find that the drivers of U.S. debt include entitlement spending such as Social Security and Medicare and discretionary government spending. And that's not really true. I mean, it's like a drop in the bucket, but people love this talking point. But he lied. We just caught him, guys. We just nabbed him.
We nailed him. We nailed him. We nailed him. Okay, well, let's hear more from Mike Johnson.
And the people want us to do it. That's what we're talking about, ensuring efficiencies, ensuring that the programs are strengthened so that they can remain solvent and help the people they're intended to help.
So you say there won't be any cuts to entitlements, but on Friday, Elon Musk, who President Trump has, of course, put in charge of making cuts all across the government, called Social Security, quote, the biggest Ponzi scheme of all time. Mr. Speaker, is that a sign that Social Security is Elon Musk's next target?
Yes, it is, I think. And this dates back to, this is like just like standard like Republican policy. George W. Bush really pushed this, but he had to drop it because it was so unpopular. But basically what they want to do is turn Social Security into another Wall Street market where basically people gamble with their Social Security benefits and turn it over to Wall Street. George W. Bush pushed that. I forgot like the term he used. It was some like Orwellian term about like
some Frank Luntz term.
Yeah. But they had to back down because it was so unpopular, because Social Security helps low-income people, elderly people survive. And they hate that. They hate the idea of like a society taking care of everybody, right, especially the most vulnerable. So that's what they want to gamble with. And look at Mike Johnson's response here. It's so revealing.
No, well, I've met with Elon about this multiple times. We meet late into the night in his office, and we've looked at that.
Sounds a little inappropriate, by the way.
Yeah, and also he has to go to Elon Musk's office. Like, right, Elon Musk doesn't come to his office. Like, hello, House Speaker Elon. Hello, Co-President Elon. Like, why can't Elon come to Mike? He's the House Speaker. That's a big deal. Elon doesn't even have a job, an official title. But yet, Mike Johnson has to go visit him for counsel.
He's finding with his algorithms crawling through the data of Social Security system is enormous amounts of fraud, waste, and abuse.
So it's a target.
And we need to target that. The American people want us to. No, Kristen, don't put words in my mouth. What I am saying.
She's not putting words in your mouth. She's quoting you, and also it's in the document that you said it wasn't in.
Saying is we have a moral responsibility to ensure that those programs are conducted in a way that does not allow for this massive fraud and abuse. And that's what he is finding. He's finding, for example, that one Social Security number can be assigned to dozens or maybe hundreds of people, so that every time there's a check distribution, it goes to all those different addresses. There was no safeguard in the existing software, the Social Security, to prevent that from happening. That is outrageous. And when these examples are presented to the American people, they're going to be on the side of Doge and Elon, President Trump, and the Republicans in Congress. And we look forward to cleaning that up.
It's worth noting the Social Security Administration's internal watchdog found that less than 1% of benefit payments were improper. I do want to get to my final question, though, which is about the shutdown.
Don't believe it. Hey, don't believe it.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news.
That's what they should say when to his talking points.
Yeah, don't believe it. It said believe Elon. Believe Elon. Yeah. What he calls Social Security the biggest Ponzi scheme. I mean, it's so offensive.
So ridiculous. Yeah.
It's so offensive. These people, these oligarchs, are not happy being just ridiculously wealthy beyond the imagination.
So gross.
Any program that helps vulnerable people stay alive, they're contemptuous of, and it's really it's scary. It is. As much as I personally think it's great that they're bucking the trend when it comes to war with Russia, I think that's a positive thing.
Yeah.
Domestically, they're a massive threat, and Democrats. I wish we could have one Democrat who was like could stand up to them on this while also maintaining the traditional progressive stance of being anti-war, which unfortunately we don't have right now at the national level, including our next speaker, Bernard Sanders, who is upset that Trump is talking about making peace with Russia. But to his credit, Bernie Sanders is leading the charge to stand up to the oligarchy domestically.
Yeah, on this issue, he's great.
Fighting to save Medicaid and Social Security. So here's Bernie Sanders.
Let me ask you about Social Security, and you raised Elon Musk, Senator, so let me follow up with you on this very point, because he's made some very pointed comments about Social Security. I referenced it earlier in the broadcast. This was to Joe Rogan. I'd like you to hear it and get your reaction on the other side. Take a look.
Social Security is the biggest Ponzi scheme of all time. Basically, people are living way longer than expected. And there are fewer babies being born. So you have more people.
Which, by the way, I'm sure he's really upset about because he's such a weird sadist, non-human, that he probably wants them to die off already. Yeah.
People who are retired and that live for a long time and get retirement payments. So the future obligation. So however bad the financial situation is right now for the federal government, it will be much worse in the future.
Senator, President Trump says he's not going to touch Social Security. Elon Musk calls it a Ponzi scheme. Do you agree?
No, I think what Musk, the wealthiest guy in the world, just said is totally outrageous. That's a hell of a Ponzi scheme when for the last 80 years, Social Security has paid out every nickel owed to every eligible American. Quite a Ponzi scheme. What is in fact a problem is that if we don't make reforms and improve the funding mechanism, in the next 9 years, the Social Security Trust Fund, which provides about 20% of the funding, will go broke. So what we have got to do, and I think most Americans agree, and I've just introduced legislation to do that, is you lift the cap on taxable income. Right now, Musk, worth $400 billion, contributes the same amount into the Social Security Trust Fund as somebody making $170 million. You lift that cap, we can extend the solvency of Social Security for 75 years, and you can raise benefits. Kristen, right now in America, half of elderly people are trying to get by on $30,000 a year, 22% on $15,000 a year. We've got to raise Social Security benefits. We've got to expand Medicare to include hearing, dental, and vision, not go after these programs which are so important to millions of our seniors.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking.
Well, thank you, Lester Holt, for giving us these wonderful clips, including a Bernie Sanders there. You know, again, I've been very critical of him when it comes to his foreign policy. He, for example, voted to confirm Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State. Marco Rubio, who just has pushed through another multi-billion-dollar weapons transfer to Israel. But domestically, Bernie Sanders has kept his principles, and he's right. And it's scary what the Republicans are trying to push through. And Mike Johnson claiming they're not going to touch Medicaid. Basically, they're saying that while also saying we're going to go after fraud, which I think basically means they're going to use fraud as an excuse to kick people off. And that will be a problem for them politically because there are Medicaid recipients, many of them, who voted for Trump. And how are they going to feel if their benefits are taken away? You're muted, Kate.
Sorry, the dog was barking. Yeah, totally. And, you know, Bernie is really excellent on this issue. And this is also a reminder, the fact that he cares about older people. We're all going to become older people, hopefully, unless something goes wrong. So people really should care about this, even if it's only out of self-interest. Like, even if you have no empathy for other people, you probably want to care about this.
Yeah, I mean, maybe someone like Elon Musk, who knows if he's getting like blood transfusions of like younger men that some of these billionaire oligarchs have been rumored to do. But the rest of us who can't afford, you know, the to be stealing the blood of healthy young people, yeah, we're gonna have to deal with this. And the agenda that the Republicans are pushing is a threat to everybody.
Right. Yep. Absolutely disgusting. Well, I think that's a wrap, right?
This segment has been sponsored by the Social Security Administration of the U.S. Right. We take a cut of Social Security to promote Social Security. So thank you to our sponsor.
Yeah, thank you to our sponsor. Yeah. Well, we did start a little late, and we spent a long time on the first clip, but it's such an important clip, and we did give you 13 minutes of extra content. So you're welcome.
Give us Write it down, everybody.
If you haven't.
Write it down. Write that down. Put that in your diary that we gave you 13 minutes of content.
Yeah. And let's see. Just a little plug for this week's Katie Halper show. I'll be playing interviews with David Cross and Wallace Shawn, which is a great time, obviously. Yeah.
Well, I'm not cross at that announcement.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. 7 p.m. youtube.com/the Katie Halper show. And make sure you go to our site, usefulidiospodcast.com, to get Thursday Throwdown and extended interviews, which are always so important to watch. And we will see you next week.
Bye everybody.
Everyone.